So I'm about to open up Aristotle, his book Politics, and I was a bit shocked by his justification of slavery and of naturally enslaved and natural masters. So I don't condone anything in what I'm about to read. This is only for educational purposes. Aristotle's Politics, Book 1, The Human Good and the Political Community. We see that every city is some sort of community, and that every community is constituted for the sake of some good, since everyone does everything for the sake of what seems good. Clearly, then, while all communities aim at some good, the community that aims most of all at the good that most of all controls all the other goods, is the one that most of all controls and includes the others. And this is the one called the city, the political community. It is wrong, then, to suppose, as some do, that the character of the politician, the king, the household manager, and the slave master is the same. People suppose this because they think the difference is not a difference in kind, but only in the number who are ruled, so that the ruler of a few is a master, the ruler of more people is a household manager, and the ruler of still more people is a politician or king, on the assumption that a large household is no different from a small city. And all they can say to distinguish a king from a politician is that someone who directs things himself is a king, whereas someone who follows the principles of political science, ruling and being ruled in turn, is a politician. These views are not true. What we mean will be clear if the investigation follows our recognized line of inquiry. Just as in other cases, we must divide the composite into incomposites, since they are the smallest parts of the whole, so also in this case we must investigate the components of the city. For then we will also see better the difference between these rulers and the prospect of finding any sort of scientific treatment of the questions we have mentioned. The best way to study this, as well as other matters, is to trace things back to their beginnings and observe their growth. First, then, those who cannot exist without each other have to form pairs, as female and male do for reproduction. And they do not do this because of any decision, but from the natural impulse that they share with other animals and with plants to leave behind another of the same kind as oneself. Self-preservation, rather than reproduction, is the basis of the natural division between ruler and subject. For the capacity for rational foresight makes one a natural ruler and a natural master, and the capacity to execute this foresight by bodily labor makes another a subject and a natural slave. That is why the interests of master and slave coincide. Now there is a natural distinction between the female and the slave. For nature makes nothing stingily, like a smith making a Delphic knife, but makes one thing for one function, since the best instrument for a particular function is made exclusively for it, not for many others. Among foreigners, however, female and slave have the same rank. The reason is that no foreigners are natural rulers, and so their community consists of a female slave and a male slave. Hence the poets say, "It is to be expected that Greeks rule over foreigners," assuming that the foreigner and the slave are naturally the same. And so from these two communities, between female and male and between slave and master, the first community that results is the household. Hesiod was right when he said, "Get first of all a house, a wife, and a plough ox," for the poor use an ox in place of a slave. Hence the community naturally formed for every day is a household of breadbin-mates, as Charondas calls them, or as Epimetheus the Cretan says, manger-mates. The first community formed from a number of households for long-term advantage is a village, and the most natural type of village would seem to be an extension of a household, including children and grandchildren, sometimes called milkmaid. This is why cities were also originally ruled by kings, and some nations are ruled by kings even at present. They were formed from communities ruled by kings, for in every household the oldest member rules as its king, and the same is true in its extensions, because the villagers are related by kinship. Homer describes this when he says, "Each rules over his children and wives, because they were isolated as households were in ancient times." And for the same reason, everyone says that gods are ruled by a king. It is because we were all ruled by kings in ancient times, and some still are, and human beings ascribe to the gods a human way of life, as well as a human form. The complete community, formed from a number of small villages, is a city. Unlike the others, it has the full degree of practically every sort of self-sufficiency. It comes to be for the sake of living, but remains in being for the sake of living well. That is why every city is natural, since the previous communities are natural. For the city is their end, and nature is an end. For we say that something's nature, for instance, of a human being, a horse, or a household, is the character it has when its coming to be is complete. Moreover, the final cause and end is the best good, and self-sufficiency is both the end and the best good. It is evident, then, that the city exists by nature, and that a human being is by nature a political animal. Anyone without a city because of his nature rather than his fortune is either worthless or superior to a human being. Like the man reviled by Homer, he has no kin, no law, no home. For his natural isolation from a city gives him an appetite for war, since, like a solitary piece in a game of checkers, he has no partner. It is evident why a human being is more of a political animal than is any bee or any gregarious animal. For nature, we say, does nothing pointlessly, and a human being is the only animal with rational discourse. A voice signifies pleasure and pain, and so the other animals, as well as human beings, have it, since their nature is far enough advanced for them to perceive pleasure and pain and to signify them to one another. But rational discourse is for making clear what is expedient or harmful, and hence what is just or unjust. For this is distinctive of human beings in contrast to the other animals, that they are the only ones with a perception of good and evil, and of just and unjust, and so on. And it is community in these that produces a household and a city. Further, the city is naturally prior to the household and to the individual, since the whole is necessarily prior to the part. For if the whole animal is dead, neither foot nor hand will survive, except homonymous,ly, as if we were speaking of a stone hand, for this is what a dead hand will be. Now everything is defined by its function and potentiality, and so anything that has lost them should not be called the same thing, but a homonymous thing. Clearly, then, the city is also natural and is prior to the individual, for if the individual separated from the city is not self-sufficient, his relation to it corresponds to that of parts to wholes in other cases. And anyone who is incapable of membership in a community, or who has no need of it because he is self-sufficient, is no part of a city, and so is either a beast or a god. Everyone has a natural impulse, then, towards this sort of community, and whoever first constituted is the cause of the greater goods. For just as a human being is the best of the animals if he has been completed, he is also the worst of them if he is separated from law and the rule of justice. For injustice is more formidable when it is armed, and a human being naturally grows up armed and equipped for intelligence and virtue, but can most readily use this equipment for ends that are contrary to intelligence and virtue. Hence, without virtue, he is the most unscrupulous and savage of animals, the most excessive in pursuit of sex and food. Justice, however, is political, for the rule of justice is an order in the political community, and justice is the judgment of what is just. Since it is evident what parts constitute the city, we must first discuss household science, since every city is constituted of household. The parts of household management are the constituent parts of the household, and a complete household is constituted of slaves and free people. Since we should begin our inquiry with the smallest parts of a thing, and since the primary and smallest parts of a household are master and slave, husband and wife, father and children, we should investigate these three things to see what each of them is and what its character ought to be. The three are the combination ruled by the master, the marital combination, and third, the child-producing combination. Let these, then, be the names of the three we mentioned. There is also a fourth part, which some people think is the whole of household management, and which others think is the greatest part of it. We should study what is true of this. I refer to what is called money-making. First, let us discover master and slave to see what is useful for the necessities of life, and to see if we can reach knowledge that improves on current views about them. For some suppose that rule over slaves is a science, and that household management, rule over slaves, political science, and kingly science are all the same, as we said in the beginning. Others, however, suppose that ruling over slaves is against nature, since, they say, law makes one free and another a slave, whereas nature draws no distinction between them. That is why such rule, they say, is also unjust, since it rests on force. Possession is a part of the household, and acquisition of possessions is part of the household management, since we can neither live nor live well without the necessities. And so, just as the well-defined crafts need their proper tools if they are to complete their work, the same is true of the household manager. Some tools are inanimate, others animate. The pilot, for instance, uses the rudder as an inanimate tool and the lookout as an animate tool. Since in the practice of the crafts, a servant serves as a tool. In the same way, then, a possession is a tool for living, and one's possessions are a collection of tools. A slave, then, is a particular sort of animate tool, and every servant is a tool prior to other tools. For suppose that each tool could follow orders, or could itself perceive in advance what is needed, and so could complete its work by itself, like the statues of Daedalus, or the tripods of Hephaestus, which, according to the poet, moved by themselves into the assembly of gods. If, in the same way, a shuttle worked by itself and a plectrum struck the chords of the lyre by itself, master craftsmen would have no need of servants, and masters would have no need of slaves. What we normally call tools are in fact tools for production, while a possession is a tool for action. For a shuttle results in something apart from its use, whereas a garment or a bed results only in the use of it. Further, since action and production differ in species, and tools are needed for both, tools must also differ accordingly. Now, a way of life is action, not production. That is why a slave is a servant in what promotes action. We speak of a possession in the same way we speak of a part. For a part is not only a part of another thing, but belongs altogether to the other thing. And the same is true of a possession. That is why a master is only a master of a slave, and does not also belong to the slave. Whereas the slave not only is the slave of a master, but also belongs altogether to the master. It is clear from this, then, that what the nature and complexity of a slave is. Someone is a natural slave if, though a human being, he belongs to another, not to himself. A human being belongs to another if, though a human being, he is a possession. And a possession is a tool that is for action and is separable. We must next consider whether there are any natural slaves, any for whom it is better and just to be slaves, or there are none, so that all slavery is against nature. This is easy both to study from arguments and to grasp from the things that for ruling and being ruled are not only necessary, but also expedient. And right from birth, some members of a species are suited for ruling and are divided from those suited for being ruled. There are many species of rulers and ruled, and in every case, rule over the better is better. For instance, rule over a human being is better than rule over a beast, for the function fulfilled by better agents is a better function, and where one rules and another is ruled, both have a function. For whenever things are constituted from another number of parts, continuous or divided, and one common whole results, the ruler and ruled are discernible in every case. Animate things receive this order from the nature of the universe, for even things without life, for instance, a musical harmony, have some sort of ruling principle, But presumably this is a topic for a more popular investigation than the present one. An animal, first of all, is constituted primarily of soul and body, and the soul is the natural ruler, whereas the body is ruled. In investigating what is natural, we should attend to things in the natural condition, not in a corrupt condition. Hence, we should also study human beings in the best condition of body and soul. In this case, it is clear that the soul is natural ruler. For in depraved people, or those in a depraved condition, the body often seems to rule the soul, because their condition is base and unnatural. As we say then, it is in an animal first of all that we can observe a master's rule and political rule. For the rule of soul over body is a master's rule, and the rule of intellect over desire is political, or rather kingly, rule. And here it is evident that it is natural and expedient for the body to be ruled by the soul, and for the affective part to be ruled by the intellect, by the part that has reason, whereas equality or the reverse order is harmful for all. The same applies to the rule of human beings over other animals. For the tame animals are naturally better than the wild, and it is better for all the tame ones to be ruled by a human being, since that is how they are preserved. Further, the male is naturally superior, the female inferior, and the male is naturally the ruler, and the female the ruled. And this must be true of all human beings as well, as of other animals. Hence, those who are as different from normal human beings as body is from soul, or beast from human being, and this is the condition of those who function, and best product is the use of their body, these are natural slaves, and it is better for them, just as for the others we have mentioned, to be ruled by a master's rule. For someone is a natural slave if he is capable of belonging to another. That is why he belongs to another. If, that is to say, he shares in reason enough to perceive it in another without having it himself. For the other animals obey feelings, not reason, and moreover, the use of slaves differs little from the use of tame animals, since both provide bodily help in securing necessities. Now, nature tends to distinguish the bodies as well as the souls of the free and the slaves, so that slaves' bodies are strong for use in securing necessities, whereas free people's bodies are upright, and so useless for such work, but useful for political life, which is divided into use in war and use in peace. In fact, however, the contrary of the natural tendency often happens too, so that some have free people's bodies, and others have their souls. For at any rate, it is evident that if some people's bodies turned out to be as superior as the images of the gods are, everyone would say that the inferior are appropriately slaves to the superior. And if this is true in the case of the body, it is much more justifiable to draw the distinction in the case of the soul. But the beauty of the soul is less easily seen than the beauty of the body. It is evident then that some are naturally free, others naturally slaves, and for natural slaves, slavery is both expedient and just. On the other hand, it is easy to see that those who take the contrary view that slavery is unjust are also, in a way, correct. For we speak in two ways of slavery and a slave. Apart from natural slave, there is also a legal slave and legal slavery. For this law is a sort of agreement declaring that the losers in war belong to the winners. Now, many students of law impeach this allegedly just provision as unlawful, as if it were a speaker, for they find it shocking that if one side is strong enough to force the other and is superior in power, the victim of the force is to be ruled as a slave. Some take this view, and others, among the wise as well as among the many, take the other view. This dispute arises and the arguments overlap because virtue, if supplied with resources, also in a way has the most power to force. And moreover, in every case, the winner excels in some good. This makes it seem that superior force always implies virtue, and that only a question of justice is in dispute. This is why some think justice is goodwill, while others think that precisely this rule by the superior in power is just. For when these arguments are taken in separation, neither has any strong or persuasive reply to the view that it is right for the one who is better in virtue to rule. And in general, some cling to what they take to be a sort of justice, since law is a sort of justice, when they take enslavement and war to be just. But at the same time, they say it is not just, for the wars may begin unjustly, and one would never say that someone who does not deserve to be enslaved is a slave. If we disagree with this, it will turn out I can't read anymore. It just talks about slavery. Okay. It is clear then that there is some reason for the dispute, and that those enslaved are not invariably natural slaves, nor are the enslavers naturally free. It is also clear that in some cases the natural slave and the free person are distinguished. In these cases, it is expedient for the natural slave to be enslaved and for the naturally free person to be the master. My God. It is right for one to be ruled and for the other to rule, blah, blah, blah. It's expedient and not expedient when they... End of book 1. Okay, I'm going to read from Aristotle, book 2 of Politics. Criticisms of proposals for ideal states. Our decision is to study the best political community for those who are capable of living, as far as possible, in the conditions they would aspire to live in. Hence we must also investigate the political systems that are found in cities to be well governed, and also any systems other people have proposed that seem well conceived. Our aim is to see what the correct condition is for the city and what is useful, and also to show that in searching for something different from these systems, we are not behaving like people who want, above all, to play the sophist, but are undertaking this line of inquiry in response to the inadequacies of current systems. The proposal that all the rulers' women should be shared raises many objections. In particular, Socrates' arguments do not make it apparent why he thinks why he thinks this legislation is needed. Moreover, the end he prescribes for the city is impossible, taken literally, and he has not explained how else we should take it. I refer to Socrates' assumption that it is best if all the city is as unified as possible. It is evident, on the contrary, that as the city goes further and further in the direction of unity, it will finally not even be a city, for a city is by nature a mass of people, and it becomes more and more unified. First the city will turn into a household, and then the household will turn into just one person. For we would say that a household is more unified than a city, and one person is more unified than a household. And so, even if someone were capable of completely unifying a city, he shouldn't do it, because he would destroy the city. Besides, a city is composed not merely of a number of human beings, but of those different in kind. For similar people do not constitute a city. For a city is different from an alliance. For since an alliance naturally aims at assistance, the added quantity, even of something the same in kind, makes the ally useful, like a weight that pulls the balance down further. A city differs in the same way from a nation that is not scattered in separate villages but is all together, as the Arcadians are. In contrast to these cases, the parts from which a unity comes to be must differ in kind. This is why reciprocal equality preserves a city. As we said before in the Ethics, even free and equal people need this, since they cannot all rule at the same time, but must rule for a year, or some other fixed length. Such an arrangement ensures that they all rule, just as if cobblers and carpenters were to change occupations, and the same people were not cobblers or carpenters all the time. Since the normal practice in the crafts is also better in the political community, it is clearly better if the same people are, if possible, always rulers. But in some circumstances this is not possible, because all are naturally equal, and moreover it is just for all to take part in ruling, whether it is a benefit or a burden. This arrangement, where equals yield office to each other in turn and are similar when they are not holding office, at least imitates the practice of the crafts. Some rule and others are ruled, taking turns, as though they had become other people.
In the same way, among the rulers themselves, different ones rule in different ruling office. It is evident, then, that from what we have said, that a city is not naturally unified in the way that some claim it is, and that the unity alleged to be the greatest good for the cities in fact destroys them, whereas a thing's good preserves it. It is evident in another way, too, that attempts at excessive unification do not benefit a city. For a household is more self-sufficient than an individual is, and a community of a mass of people counts as a city only if it proves to be self-sufficient. Since, then, what is more self-sufficient is more choice-worthy, what is less unified is, in this case, more choice-worthy than what is more unified. But even if it is indeed best if the community is as unified as possible, Socrates' argument does not seem to demonstrate that this will be the effect of agreement in saying, quote, mine and, quote, not mine. Though Socrates regards this agreement as a sign of the cities being completely unified. For all is said in two ways. If all, taken each one at a time, speak of what is mine, then perhaps the unity that Socrates wants to produce would be more likely to result. For each one will call the same person his own son, and the same person his own wife, and will speak in the same way of property and whatever else he has. In fact, however, those who share wives and children will not speak in this way. They will altogether, not each one at a time, regard wives and children as theirs. And similarly, altogether, not each taken one at a time, will regard property as theirs. Evidently, then, speaking of all is a fallacious inference. For all, both, odd, and even, also produce contentious deductions in discussions because they are spoken of in these two ways. Hence, if all say the same thing, the result is in one case fine, but not possible, and in the other case contributes nothing to concord. Besides this, the proposal mentioned involves a further harm. For what is common to the largest number of people gets least attention, since people think most about what is private to them, and they think less about what is common, or else think about what is common only to the extent that it applies to each of them. They care less about it because, in addition to other reasons, they assume that someone else is thinking about it. As in household service, many attendants sometimes serve worse than a few. In Socrates' city, each citizen will have 1,000 sons, but not as sons of each taken one at a time. Any given son will be the son of this father no more than any other, and so all the fathers alike will care little about them. And in general, the results of this sort of law, eliminating private property, are bound to be contrary to the results to be expected from correctly established laws, and contrary to Socrates' aim in prescribing these arrangements about children and women. For we think friendship is the greatest good for cities, since it best prevents civil conflict in them. Indeed, Socrates himself praises the unity of the city more than anything, and, like other people, he takes unity to be the result of friendship. In the same way, as we know in the discussions of erotic love, Aristophanes says that erotic lovers love so intensely that they long to grow together and make one person out of two. But whereas this union requires the perishing of one or both of the lovers, sharing of wives and children will merely make friendship in the city watery, and it will be least true that a father speaks of my son, or a son of my father. For just as a little of something sweet mixed into a lot of water makes the mixture imperceptible, the same is true of the mutual closeness resulting from these names, father and son, since this sort of political system is the least likely to ensure that a father is especially concerned for his son, or a son for his father, or one brother for another. For the two most important sources of care and friendship among human beings are the fact that someone is one's own and the fact that one likes it. Neither can be true of those living under such a political system. These, then, and others like them, are the disagreeable results of common ownership. The present arrangement would be far better if it were improved by good habits and ordered by correct laws. For in that case, it would have the advantages of both arrangements, that is, of common and of private ownership. For ownership ought to be common in a way, but basically private. If different people attend to different things, no mutual accusations result, and they will together contribute more, since each person keeps his mind on his proper concerns. On the other hand, virtue will make friends' possessions common, as the proverb says, for their use. Even now, there are traces of this arrangement in outline in some cities, suggesting that it is not impossible, and especially in well-managed cities, some aspects are already there, and others might arise. For while each has his own possessions, he offers his own for his friends to use and uses his friends' possessions as common possessions. In Sparta, for instance, they use one another's slaves practically as their own, and do the same with horses and dogs, and with the fields around the countryside, if they need food for a journey. Evidently, then, it is better to own possessions privately, but make them common by our use of them. And it is the legislator's proper task to see that the right sort of people develop. Further, it is unbelievably more pleasant to regard something as one's own, for each person's love of himself is not pointless, but a natural tendency. Certainly, selfishness is quite rightly blamed, but selfishness is not love of oneself, but excessive self-love. The same distinction applies to love of money, since practically everyone loves himself and loves money. Moreover, the pleasantest thing is to please or to help our friends or guests or companions, and we can do this when ownership is private. These, then, are the results for those who unify the city excessively. Moreover, they evidently remove any function for two virtues: temperance towards women, since it is a fine action to refrain because of temperance from a woman who is someone else's wife, and generosity with our own possessions, since no one's generosity will be evident, and no one will do any generous action. For generosity has its function in the use of possessions. I'll stop there for now. It looks like book 3 is rather long. Save that for another time.